Have you ever wondered why a man seems to lose his center the moment a woman pulls away? Not through anger or words, but through silence? When her energy, once warm and alive, retreats into stillness, something ancient awakens inside him. It's not merely longing, it's a confrontation with the void within himself. Carl Jung once wrote that what we call love is often the meeting of two unconscious needs, projections of what we refuse to face within. When a woman withdraws her energy, that projection shatters. The mirror breaks. And the man who once saw himself reflected in her light is left to face the darkness of his own unhealed soul. He doesn't understand it at first. He calls it confusion, maybe loss, perhaps even anger. But beneath those emotions lies something far more primal, the recognition that his sense of power, his imagined control, was never his own. It was borrowed from her attention, her softness, her intuitive presence that made him feel real. When she withdraws, he trembles, not because she has vanished, but because her silence holds up a mirror to everything he has not yet become. In Jungian psychology, this moment is the eruption of the anima, the feminine principle within the male psyche. Every man carries this inner woman, his emotional, instinctive, feeling nature. Yet most men fear her. They project her onto living women, seeking in them what they have abandoned in themselves. The woman becomes the vessel for his soul, his refuge from inner chaos. But when she steps back, he feels abandoned by his own essence. What truly hurts is not her absence, it's the echo of his own disconnection from his soul. And you, the woman who withdraws, may feel torn between compassion and sovereignty. The world has taught you that nurturing is love, that silence is cruelty. But there is a sacred kind of silence, a silence that doesn't punish but liberates. It's the silence of self-respect, the moment you stop negotiating your worth through how much you give. When your energy retreats, not in bitterness but in peace, you awaken something divine. You remind him and yourself that love cannot exist without consciousness. Jung would say that the withdrawal of feminine energy is a symbolic descent into the underworld. It's Persephone reclaiming her time in the shadows. The man, left above, feels the chill of her absence and begins to see the world in grayscale. His fantasies dissolve. His ego, once inflated by her devotion, begins to deflate. What he experiences as loss is, in truth, the beginning of his initiation. For the first time, he stands alone with his shadow. Many men are unprepared for this. They seek distraction, another woman, another achievement, another noise to drown out the silence she left behind. But some, the few who dare to look inward, begin to understand. Her absence was not punishment, it was a lesson. Her withdrawal forced him to see that his identity was built on external affirmation, not inner strength. In that trembling space, he meets the ghost of his dependence, the part of him that worshipped her not as a person but as a source of validation. And while he wrestles with that shadow, she too undergoes her metamorphosis. In the stillness of her withdrawal, she meets herself again, not as the giver, not as the emotional caretaker, but as the woman who owns her life force. She remembers that her energy is sacred currency. Not everyone earns the right to hold it. When she reclaims it, her aura changes. It becomes magnetic, untouchable. Men sense it without words. The very same presence that once made her easy to approach now radiates an untamed serenity. She no longer needs to chase, convince, or explain. Her silence becomes her language. And that silence is not emptiness, it's potency. In Stoic philosophy, Marcus Aurelius spoke of the calm that comes from inner mastery, the refusal to be ruled by external storms. A woman in her silence embodies this same mastery. She no longer reacts, she observes. She no longer pleads, she decides. She realizes that detachment is not the absence of love, but the highest expression of it, a love free from fear and control. For the man, this realization is equally transformative. The trembling he feels is not weakness, it's the cracking of his armor. Each tremor exposes another layer of false strength, another illusion of dominance. In time, if he is brave enough, he will learn to honor her silence rather than resent it. He will understand that her withdrawal was not rejection but revelation, a chance to meet his anima, to integrate the feminine within himself, and to love not as possession but as presence. But few reach that point easily. The journey from ego to essence is violent. It demands humility, patience, and the death of old narratives. Most men will try to return her energy to its former orbit, to restore the comfort of dependency. Yet the awakened woman does not orbit, she radiates. Her energy no longer flows outward to be consumed, it circles within, feeding her intuition, her dreams, her peace. And so, the trembling of a man's soul becomes the symphony of his awakening. Her silence, once unbearable, becomes his teacher. The same stillness that felt like loss becomes the ground from which he begins to grow. For in the withdrawal of her energy, he encounters the only force capable of transforming him, the absence that demands he find his own light. There is a sacred paradox in the feminine withdrawal, a silence that speaks louder than words, a distance that burns deeper than touch. When a woman reclaims her energy, she does not simply step back from a man. She steps back from the illusion that her love must be proven through sacrifice. It is in that quiet revolution that she ceases to be an object of desire and becomes an archetype of awakening. Jung would call this the rise of the self, the moment when the conscious and unconscious begin to merge, and a woman starts to live not from reaction but from essence. For centuries, women have been conditioned to believe that love is sustained by effort, that emotional labor, tolerance, and constant giving are the price of intimacy. But the psyche knows otherwise. Deep within, the feminine soul carries an instinctive knowing that true connection cannot bloom where energy is one-sided. The woman who withdraws is not being cold. She is obeying the natural law of psychic balance. She senses when her light has become fuel for another's ego, and she withdraws not to punish, but to restore harmony within herself. This act, though often misunderstood, is a profound expression of individuation, Jung's term for the process of becoming whole. The woman who turns inward begins to integrate the parts of herself she once exiled, the wild, the still, the intuitive, the unapologetic. Her silence becomes a sanctuary where her fragmented identities dissolve, and what remains is not the caretaker, not the lover, but the woman who is whole without needing to be completed. Men, however, often misinterpret this transformation. Conditioned to equate power with control, they perceive her detachment as rejection. Yet beneath that discomfort lies an invitation, a call to introspection. The moment her energy withdraws, his unconscious begins its descent into the shadow. It's the same shadow that Jung described as the dark side of the personality, where all that is repressed waits to be acknowledged. Her silence, therefore, is not an attack but an alchemical mirror reflecting everything he denies: his vulnerability, his fear of abandonment, his dependence on validation. If he listens closely, that silence becomes a teacher. It whispers truths that words could never convey, that love cannot save him from his own emptiness, that no woman's devotion can substitute for self-awareness, and that the power he seeks in dominance is found only in surrender. To confront this is excruciating, for it demands that he disassemble the fortress of ego he has built to protect himself from feeling. But here lies the hidden beauty of the trembling. The same loss that breaks him also cracks open the door to his soul. He begins to realize that his desire was not for her body alone, but for the reflection of his own wholeness that he saw within her. When she steps away, he must either chase illusions or begin the long pilgrimage inward. This is the path of the awakened masculine, not conquest, but consciousness. Meanwhile, the woman in silence walks a different kind of pilgrimage. In solitude, she feels the ache of her own withdrawal. She grieves not for the man, but for the version of herself that once needed to be chosen. The silence tests her. It asks, will you return to the old patterns, or will you remain in your sovereignty? She learns that the power of her energy lies not in its giving, but in its direction. Every act of withdrawal refines her field, stripping away what drains and inviting what resonates. There is a feminine stillness that terrifies the unconscious masculine, the quiet of a woman who no longer seeks approval. This stillness is magnetic yet detached, alluring yet self-contained. Men feel it before they see it. It disorients them because it carries no demand, no chase, no need. It is the energy of the Sophia archetype, divine wisdom clothed in calm. Jung described Sophia as the inner guide that leads both men and women towards spiritual wholeness. And when a woman embodies her, she becomes a living embodiment of that wisdom, whether she speaks or not. In the presence of such a woman, a man's ego trembles because it senses the end of the game. His charm, his logic, his dominance, all the masks he once used to impress, dissolve in her serenity. She no longer plays the role of the mirror, the healer, or the muse. She has become the observer, standing at the still center of her being. And from that stillness emanates a force that neither seduces nor repels. It simply is. You may have felt this within yourself, that moment when silence felt like power, when detachment felt like truth. It's the point where emotion turns into awareness, and longing transforms into freedom. That moment is sacred. It's when you begin to see that your energy was never meant to convince, but to reveal. The man who trembles before this silence is not weak, he is awakening. For the first time, he feels the weight of his own unintegrated longing. He begins to understand that what he truly desires is not her body, but her peace, and that peace cannot be possessed. It can only be matched. And so, the distance between them becomes a sacred field of transformation. She learns to rest within herself. He learns to confront himself. And if fate allows, they may one day meet again, not as halves seeking completion, but as whole beings capable of conscious love. In the quiet that stretches between them, a deeper story begins to unfold, one that neither can fully articulate but both can feel. The energy that once bound them in passion now transforms into something subtler, something more demanding, awareness. For the man, this awareness begins as discomfort, a gnawing unease that no distraction can numb. The same woman whose attention once fed his sense of worth now feels like an unanswered question in his chest. Her silence is not emptiness, it is reflection, and in that reflection, he starts to see what he had turned away from all along. Jung said that what we resist not only persists, it grows stronger. The man resists his vulnerability, his dependence on being admired, his need to be needed. Yet the more he resists, the more her absence tightens its grip on his psyche. He begins to replay moments, searching for meaning, for control. But there is no control in the realm of soul. What trembles inside him is the collapse of his persona, the identity built on conquest, pride, and validation. In its place, something fragile begins to form, humility. Meanwhile, the woman who withdrew begins to see from a higher vantage point. Her silence has matured into perception. She can now see not just him but the pattern, the archetypal dance of the masculine and feminine that has played out since the dawn of time. She sees how women, across generations, have poured themselves into the wounds of men, believing that healing another's pain was the path to being loved. She sees how men, in turn, have clung to the feminine as a lifeline to the soul they lost touch with. But she also knows that every age has its awakening, and this is hers. There is power in seeing the pattern without trying to fix it. In that seeing, compassion replaces bitterness. She does not condemn the masculine for trembling, she simply refuses to steady him with her energy anymore. The greatest act of love, she realizes, is to let him meet his shadow alone. Only in that confrontation can he reclaim his own inner feminine, his empathy, intuition, and emotional truth. To the outside world, she seems distant, almost unreachable. But within, she is more connected than ever. She walks through her days with a quiet gravity, aware that every thought, every emotion, carries vibration. Her energy no longer scatters in anxiety or people-pleasing. It moves like a slow, steady current, grounded and deliberate. There is something magnetic in this stillness, something that commands respect without a word. Men sense it, women feel it. It is the energy of self-possession, the rarest form of beauty. And though she does not seek to teach, her very presence teaches. She becomes the mirror of possibility, what it looks like when a woman remembers her worth. There is no pride in it, no arrogance, just an unshakable calm that comes from no longer trading energy for validation. She begins to understand what the Stoics meant by self-mastery, not the suppression of emotion, but the freedom from emotional dependence. Seneca wrote that no person is free who is not master of themselves. She has become that mastery in motion. For the man, the silence stretches into a long winter. But as every winter promises, spring waits quietly beneath the frost. The longer he sits with his discomfort, the more his perception begins to shift. He starts to see that her energy was never his to own, only his to honor. The trembling, once unbearable, begins to feel sacred. He senses that what he called love before was merely attachment, the desire to keep what made him feel safe. Now, safety means something else, the courage to feel without possessing. In this awakening, he rediscovers a softer strength, the kind that does not seek to dominate but to understand. He begins to look inward, tracing the roots of his reactions, uncovering the childhood fears, the buried insecurities, the stories he told himself about love and control. And for the first time, he allows himself to feel grief, not just for her, but for the boy he once was, the boy who believed that being seen by a woman was the only proof of his worth. This grief is not weakness, it is purification. It is the moment he stops performing masculinity and starts embodying humanity. And she, sensing the shift from afar, feels a quiet relief. Not because he has changed, but because she no longer needs him to. Her detachment has given her clarity. Love is not the merging of wounds, but the meeting of wholeness. The woman who knows her worth does not withhold affection as manipulation. She simply knows that her energy must flow where it is reciprocated, not drained. At this stage, something mystical occurs. Their connection, no longer bound by attachment, begins to transform into resonance. Even in distance, they feel each other's evolution, the silent dialogue of two souls learning the same lesson from opposite ends of the mirror. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of synchronicity, the meaningful coincidences that guide the soul's growth. Her silence and his trembling are not accidents, they are the alchemy of awakening. You may recognize this pattern in your own life. The people who vanish, the silence that hurts, the distance that feels unfair, all of it conspires for awakening. Sometimes, separation is not the end, but the initiation. For love to become conscious, illusion must die. And in that death, something new is born, a kind of love that does not need to hold, to prove, or to possess. A love that breathes in freedom and still feels sacred. When the silence deepens into stillness, something ancient stirs in both souls. The woman who has withdrawn no longer measures her value through his response, and the man who trembles begins to realize that the ground he once stood on was never solid. His image of love, built on pursuit and conquest, begins to dissolve. In its place emerges an unfamiliar tenderness, the kind that asks not for ownership, but for understanding. Jung once wrote that only the paradox comes anywhere near to comprehending the fullness of life. And this indeed is the paradox. Through separation comes unity, through absence, deeper presence. For the woman, this awakening feels like a slow rising. There is no grand epiphany, no lightning strike of revelation. It is gentler, quieter, a dawning awareness that her energy is not something to be drained, but something to be directed. She realizes that what once felt like emptiness in her silence was in truth a spaciousness, a clearing for her own essence to breathe again. Her detachment, once mistaken for indifference, becomes devotion to her peace. She stops needing to explain herself, for truth no longer demands translation. In this phase, her presence changes texture. When she walks into a room, there is no urgency in her movement, no hunger in her eyes. Her calmness radiates as a kind of quiet authority, the kind that comes from no longer negotiating for love. She has integrated her shadow, the part of her that once overgave, overexplained, overextended. Jung described this as individuation, the process by which the self becomes whole, no longer fragmented by the need for external completion. And because she no longer chases energy, energy begins to chase her. The masculine feels this shift instinctively. The man who once trembled now begins to sense that her silence was never meant to wound him, it was meant to awaken him. Her absence exposed his dependence. Her stillness called forth his introspection. In his loneliness, he came to see how much of his identity had been built around the reflection of another. Without her, he has met his raw self, the unpolished, uncertain, emotional self he once avoided. In the beginning, he resists this vulnerability. His ego, unaccustomed to stillness, fights to reassert itself. It seeks new sources of validation, new distractions, new stories. But none hold. For once a man has been touched by the energy of a conscious woman, nothing unconscious can satisfy him again. Her silence echoes in every shallow connection, in every surface conversation. He begins to long not for her body, but for the mirror of depth she once offered, the reminder of who he could become. This is the spiritual gravity of the feminine. She calls the masculine not toward possession, but toward expansion. Through her withdrawal, she compels him to meet the divine feminine within himself, the anima that holds his capacity for empathy, intuition, and love without fear. And for her, the act of withdrawal reclaims the divine masculine within her, the animus that grants discernment, boundaries, and unshakable presence. Thus, both are called into balance. What began as heartbreak becomes alchemy. Silence, in this sacred context, is not void but crucible. It is where projection dies, and truth is born. The man learns to sit with his emotions without running from them. The woman learns to feel her worth without performing for it. Together, though apart, they participate in the oldest of human dances, the dance between consciousness and unconsciousness, giving and receiving, holding and releasing. For you, listening to these words, this is the truth behind every dynamic that once confused you. It is not that love failed, it evolved. Every time you withdraw your energy from someone who does not honor it, you realign with the rhythm of your own soul. And every time you sit in silence instead of chasing clarity from another, you affirm that you are the source of your own peace. The man's trembling is the sound of ego dissolving. The woman's silence is the sound of sovereignty returning. Together, they form the pulse of transformation, the inner and outer world seeking balance once more. Marcus Aurelius once wrote that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. When a woman's thoughts turn from longing to self-trust, her entire vibration changes. She no longer waits to be chosen. She realizes she has always been the chooser. Her boundaries, once seen as barriers, become portals through which only the aligned may enter. Her silence is not a wall, it is a filter. And through that filter, the masculine learns reverence. He begins to understand that love is not about conquest, but containment, the ability to hold space for the sacred without trying to own it. The trembling of his soul, once a sign of fear, becomes a rhythm of awakening. He learns to cherish without grasping, to love without consuming, to desire without losing himself. The woman, sensing this shift, no longer feels the need to armor herself. Her strength is not hard, it is soft and steady. She no longer confuses reaction with power. Her quiet confidence becomes her protection, her grace becomes her weapon. And when she moves again, when she decides to open her energy, it is not from need, but from overflow. What a man feels when a woman withdraws her energy is not abandonment, it is initiation. And what a woman discovers in her silence is not loneliness, it is divinity. Together, they mirror the eternal truth of polarity, that love, at its highest form, is not dependency but resonance. She does not return to him as she was, and he does not seek her as he once did. Something larger moves between them now, an unspoken knowing, an invisible thread woven by consciousness itself. The silence has become sacred ground. When the soul finally quiets after the storm, the woman who once withdrew her energy stands transformed. She no longer carries the ache of being unseen. She carries the serenity of one who has seen herself fully. The silence that once felt like exile has become her temple. Within it, she has met every fragment of her being, her tenderness, her anger, her longing, her fire, and none of it frightens her anymore. She is whole, and her energy now flows from that wholeness. The man who once trembled before her absence has also changed. What began as despair has ripened into awareness. The silence that wounded him became the very thing that taught him how to listen, to her, to life, and most importantly, to himself. In losing her presence, he met his own. And when he finally sees her again, perhaps not in person but in memory or dream, he no longer sees the woman who once fulfilled him. He sees the woman who freed him. Jung taught that every relationship is a dialogue between two unconscious minds, a mirror through which each soul glimpses itself. Her withdrawal broke that mirror, and in its shards, they both discovered reflections they had never dared to meet. The woman found her sovereignty, the man found his humility. She realized that love without boundaries is self-abandonment. He realized that desire without respect is emptiness. Together, though apart, they birthed consciousness through their suffering. Now, when she walks through the world, her energy feels different. It does not leak into every conversation or cling to every outcome. It is deliberate, alive, grounded in her body. She no longer gives to prove her worth, nor withholds to punish. Her energy has become art, offered only where it is honored. She understands now that her silence was never about him. It was about returning home to herself. And somewhere, perhaps far away, he feels it. Not as guilt, not as regret, but as a quiet reverence. The trembling has become memory, a scar that glows faintly with gratitude. He knows now that the loss of her presence was the beginning of his presence. He has met the woman within, the anima, and through her, he has learned to hold tenderness without fear. The man who once sought control has learned surrender. He no longer confuses her silence with rejection. He recognizes it as a sacred boundary, an act of love so pure it required distance. The universe has a way of folding such souls back into alignment, not necessarily to reunite, but to resonate. When two beings reach self-awareness, they no longer orbit in dependency, they meet in frequency. If their paths cross again, their silence will no longer be a void but a language, a knowing that requires no explanation. If their paths diverge, that too is sacred. The lesson remains complete. And for every woman listening to this is your reminder. The power of your energy does not lie in how loudly you give it, but in how clearly you direct it. The moment you stop chasing, the universe begins to rearrange itself around your stillness. Your silence is not absence, it is alignment. It is the moment when your soul whispers, "Enough, return to yourself." There will always be those who tremble when you withdraw, because your energy has been their mirror. But you were never meant to live as reflection alone. You were meant to live as flame, steady, luminous, sovereign. When you master your energy, you no longer fear being misunderstood, unseen, or left behind. You understand that what is truly aligned will rise to meet you, and what is not will fall away in peace. The man's trembling, the silence between souls, the ache of withdrawal, all are parts of the sacred rhythm of awakening. To love consciously is to allow transformation, even when it feels like loss. The woman who withdraws her energy does not destroy connection, she refines it. She calls both souls higher, to love without illusion, to desire without dependency, to exist without fear. And so, she no longer apologizes for her silence. She honors it. For in silence she found her truth, in detachment she found her depth, in stillness she found her strength. The man, too, learns to honor the trembling. For in the quaking of his soul, he discovered the path home to his heart. He understands now that love is not the pursuit of light, but the courage to face the shadows that light reveals. When a woman withdraws her energy, the world shifts subtly on its axis. Something old dies, and something eternal is born, the kind of love that no longer grasps, but simply is. The kind that expands rather than consumes. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.